Humble and kind. It's a good transition into a message today about Jesus' love for the outsider. So I want you to think with me for a moment here. And so I'll imagine a time in your life when you have felt like an outsider, that you have felt like you are not a part of the group, you are on the outside. Think about that for a minute. Have you ever felt that way? Now, my guess is that every single one here has felt like an outsider at one time in your life. I'm not asking you to confess that, but the good news is that you're in very good company because Jesus of Nazareth aligned himself with the outsider. Yes, he was a faithful Jewish soul, but he stood up to the Sadducees and the Pharisees, the religious authorities. He spent time with the tax collectors. He spent time with the prostitutes. He spent time with the unrighteous, the women, the children. He spent time with people who were on the outside. And if you have felt like an outsider at some time in your life, you are not alone. So a few stories to give to you. First thing that comes to my mind, who can identify with this? I still remember, I think it was grade 5. I'll talk to my daughter, who's now a high school teacher. Grade 5 or grade 6, the teacher said, okay, split the class up. Jimmy's going to pick this team and Susie's going to pick this team. And you're there and you're standing there going, God, don't let me be the last person chosen for this baseball team. I remember that as clear as a bell. It's like, this hole will open up and I will go into the middle of the earth if I'm chosen last. That was a moment of feeling I'm an outsider. I was pretty low though. I wasn't like the top. We all know that. We also know that when people feel left out at times, they then form groups that make them feel strong and secure. And it's widely documented, like even tragically, groups like KKK that are white supremacists, they feel this great superiority when they come together. Even though it's a horrific belief, they feel this sense of power because of the world that they are afraid of is changing. Jesus, as we know, is a change agent. And so this is all about changing our mindset. So for example, as a young minister, I remember still being in small town Palmerston. Boy, have I changed in almost 30 years now. Get the numbers right, John. I still remember this. I was this hotshot. I had a red car, John. I had a Ford Probe, actually. And they always say in Palmerston, John arrived in a Probe, and he left in a van with 3 kids. Came in a hot rod, left. That's changed, yes. And I still remember Palmerston. The church would be full on Christmas Eve. The church would be full on special occasions. And I had it in my mindset as this 20-something-year-old. I was, proclaiming the good news of the gospel, but a lot of my ego was like, I could pack a church. What's wrong with the other days? And so that led me to a bit of a psychology of, I had a little bit of resentment. I had a lot of friends in Palmerston that didn't come on Sunday mornings. They might go have a beer with me and thought I was a pretty cool pastor to them, but they wouldn't come on Sunday mornings. And I'd wrestle with that. And what am I doing wrong, God? How could it be different? What I failed to remember, though, when I was a student minister in little town of Chatsworth, my first Sunday, after my supervisor had already showed me how to get to Desborough and Massey and these little villages I'd never heard of, I'm driving to my first Sunday service, and this is my favorite summertime story. I'm driving, and I get lost in the country. Lost. No GPS, nothing. I'm lost. And I'm like going, my first Sunday, I have a congregation of probably 15 people, but it was still a congregation waiting for me, and I'm lost. And there was a dear woman hanging her clothes out on a Sunday morning. Number one, she broke the rule. She's hanging her clothes out on Sunday morning. I was raised not to do that. Number two, I pulled in, and I started talking to her, and I'm like going, I am lost. And she goes, oh, dear, don't worry. Massey's just up the road and down a little bit. And then she says to me, oh, Excuse me, that's the church I go to. I just don't go in the summertime. I loved her so fast. I said, I'm so glad you're not at church today. You're getting me there. Well, the things I worried about when I was in my 20s are so different than today. And in the journey that Jesus certainly understands is those of us who've lived life, and I know probably all of us at some point in our life, things are going along pretty smooth, and then life gets turned upside down. It's the tragic accident. It's the loved one that suddenly just drops and CPR can't bring them back. It's the poor boys that just went off to have some fun with their coach and they're in a cave and next thing you know, they're not sure if they're going to live or die. Life has a way of turning it upside down very quickly. And in those moments, Jesus knows very well that we certainly don't need judgment. We need grace and mercy. We need humbleness and kindness. And so as you think about your journey, I know at times the harshest critic I'm usually on myself, and one thing I've taken a long time to learn, but I have a very strong work ethic. So I used to think when I was younger, if I worked harder, I'll get more people into church. Now I realize it's not about getting people into church. It's about what Jesus understood. It's about compassionate for people who need it the most. And so we here at Trinity, I think we need to ask that question ourselves here in Guelph. Who needs the compassion? My kids are really good at helping me understand the LGBTQ2. So they help me realize this is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, queer, questioning, or two spirits people. And one of the things that United Church certainly has been known for has been open to gay and lesbian community, but it's broadening our understanding to know the complexities of sexuality and being open to understanding people who, I'm reading a book right now called Transforming the Lives of Transgender Christians. And this is an American writer, but in this book, she's describing how probably over 30% of the LGBTQ community come into a church. 50% are Christian, and over 30% feel rejected when they come into most churches. We have a lot to learn about that. Number two, I want to say a little something about, back to my Palmerston days again. I remember in Palmerston, one of my dearest friends, Tony, he was the only, in all of Palmerston, town of 2000, the only black person in the whole town. And everyone loved Tony. But never did I had some conversations with him, but I think it's more important than ever for us to ask that question. What is it to be the person who is a human being like all of us, but might feel a little different when everybody else is a different color? And I think we have to be more courageous to have those conversations right here in this church and to ask ourselves, who can we reach out to reach out in compassion and care? The Muslims, the poor, people of different walks of life. And so I challenge us as I close this message here. It's interesting. Jesus, when he talks about change and the remedy for the struggles of his time, he doesn't look to the unrighteous or the tax collectors or the so-called unfit people, the outsiders. He doesn't look to them and give them, here's what you should be doing. He looks to the religious people and he says, I don't require sacrifice. God requires mercy. God calls upon us for forgiveness and humility. We're called, my friends, to be a healing community. I wish David Chesney was with us right now. I know he's somewhere in Maine on holidays, but Reverend David always reminds me that when I have my days where sometimes I get really frustrated, maybe with the church or myself, he reminds me, and I lift this up to you all, that the church ultimately is like a hospital for sinners, people feeling separated from God, feeling separated from themselves. And the number one thing that we need to remember as Christians is that we don't have it all together. And that's the sad thing that gets promoted, particularly in the media, that sometimes, not all conservative evangelical Christians, but sometimes it's almost assumed you're born again, Now you've got Jesus and everything's okay. Well, the truth of the matter is you can have Jesus. And the ultimate truth in today's message is if you have Jesus, you're going to be with the outsiders. And it's less about walls in a sanctuary, and it's more about going where people are in need. So my friends, think back to when you felt like an outsider. And I ask myself, and I ask all of you, what might you do in the coming days of the week where you might be there for the outsider that needs some encouragement and care?